The teeming brain of childhood requires no external world of incident to occupy or amuse it, and the apparently dismal monotony of a school was replete with more intense excitement than my riper youth has derived from luxury or my full manhood from crime. Good evening, Poe fans. My name is Carmen Bolden.
And I'm Jeanie Smith. And we
And we
are
are the
the
Potastic
Potastic 2.
2.
Much better.
Yay!
Hey, woo woo. We're back.
And we are back, and it is season 4, episode 1.
Yay. With the first degree on the season of 4.
Yes, and we are back to school with Poe.
Yes. Why not? I mean, everybody else is coming back to school. Why not Poe?
That's right. And I think it's very apropos that we are recording today because this was my first full day back with my own students.
Ew, yuck. Oh, yeah, exciting. Sorry.
It was very exciting. I've got a great group of students. I don't know them at all yet, but yeah, it was a great first full day back. So
I mean, I miss those days. I do. I have to be honest. I do miss the days. I wish some days that I could be back in the classroom, but uh it is not to be, but that's okay. I can live through you and the others that are teaching.
that's right. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do we know about Poe? And I did that on purpose to rhyme about his schooling. And
Well,
it's very interesting background.
exactly. I mean, well, Poe's start in life is very interesting to begin with. I mean,
Right.
he has a dead mother, a deadbeat missing father. I'll say deadbeat. He could have been just, he could have just been dead. Who knows?
Yeah, true.
But
Yeah.
then he gets taken in by a foster family. And it's with that foster family that he ventures into his first real world of schooling. But the thing of it is, it's not in the United States where Poe starts his school.
Exactly. And that's
Mhm.
what's so fascinating because, Poe is the quintessential American author. However, his education started in good old England.
England, which kind of makes sense because when you think about it, when most people, when they start reading Poe, I know I was one of them. I
Mm-hmm.
say most people, it could have been just a few of us, but I always thought Poe was an European writer.
Okay. And
I didn't know he was an American author at first until I really dug deep and started looking at it. But then when you think about it, since Poe's mother didn't she come over from England?
yes, she did. Yes.
So it's kind of like he's going back to England and he's starting his education in England. So it's one of those things. It's like, oh, I'll go across the pond. Let me start my education.
Yes. But what's interesting is that, yes, his mother was born in England. However, his foster father, John Allen, who was responsible for moving his family with little Eddie to
Mm-hmm.
England, was actually born in Scotland.
Yes, he had his Scottish roots, which
Yes.
Scotland is right next door, so it's
Oh,
not that
absolutely. But
we're not that far.
yeah, and we definitely want to say Poe did not have a Scottish background. He had an
Mhm.
Irish background. And I
Yes.
believe it was in season 3, we did a Poe Places episode all about his Irish background. So check
Yes,
that out
and I
if you haven't
do.
already.
And if I'm not mistaken, didn't we do that? Was a crossover with Beyond the Oblong Box?
It was a crossover, yes, with
Yeah.
give a shout out to Virginia and Levi.
Woo! And
Yes.
so, but the thing about it is John Allen up and took his family, which just basically was his wife and Edgar. at the
Right.
time because his first wife, she could never conceive is how they ended up with Edgar.
Mm-hmm.
And so he hauls him off to England because of a business that he wanted to develop with about general merchant and tobacco trading firm Ellis and Allen,
Right.
which that's why he expected to be over there for a while. So, and we all knew, well, we all know now that hopping over to England is not like it is today, where it's just like a three or 4 hour flight if you're coming from the east coast of like Massachusetts or Virginia over to
Mm-hmm.
England, where
Mm-hmm.
back then it was like a 4 week boat trip.
Exactly. And
Mm-hmm.
this was 1815 when
Yep.
they set sail for Europe.
Yes. So 4 weeks on the high seas, and those were not, calm areas. But can you imagine being, in 1815, Poe would only been what, 4 years old?
Yes. Well, let's
So
see.
being
He
a
was eight, six.
1809.
Yeah, six.
Wait, so yeah, okay,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Or
1809.
yeah, and depending on
Yeah,
birthday,
six.
yeah, but he was roughly around six,
Yeah.
equating to our schooling, kindergarten, first grade age.
Yes. So he was right at that early age, and we all know that in the early days, the rich people, you didn't go to just regular public schools, you went to boarding schools.
Exactly. And so when they arrived in Europe, they actually stopped, they landed in Irvine, Scotland.
Mhm.
And for the most part, at the beginning, they basically lived with a lot of the relatives of the Allen family. And so they lived in a ton of different places, some including Galts, or let's see, I'm sorry, no, that was some of the family, the Galts, the Allens, and the is it Fowls? Fowlds was another part of the family. They were
Or
all connected
yeah.
to the Allens. And so, but they lived all over. And so, some of the places that they went and lived were Irvine and Kilmamock and around Ayrshire, Scotland.
Mhm.
And then the Allen family with little Poe traveled to Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Greenock in London later in the fall of 1815. So it would have been a lot earlier in 1815 when they went over. I was going to say, I hope they did not travel in the winter.
No, because we know what happens if you travel in the winter or when it sank Titanic
Yeah,
across the Atlantic. So I
exactly.
think
And
usually they only traveled around between, I'd say May between May and August,
yeah,
probably.
yeah. And that makes perfect sense. And
Hmm.
so they decided to place little Eddie in a school in Irvine at the Yard Grammar School at Kirk Gatehead.
Okay. Say
That
that
was
five times
his.
fast.
Yeah, I know. And he didn't actually stay there for very long because unfortunately the school closed down. And
Yeah.
the following July, a new academy was in its place, but so basically his first school, he was just there a short time. So there's not a whole lot of information about that school.
Well, it makes sense since it kind of buckled under and went away. There wouldn't be a lot of records or any ideas about it. So, I mean, how much could he have learned in that time being, what, 6 years old?
Right, right. I mean, it would have been, with it being a grammar school, they probably would have been focusing on
Yeah,
really
just
reading, writing, and arithmetic.
absolutely, which was always the major things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it was 1816, the next year,
Mm-hmm.
that after that boarding school, that he started another boarding school, Mrs. Dubourg. And
Yes.
then it's also said that he used the name of the laundress in
Mm-hmm.
at that school in the murders in the Rue Morgue, Pauline Dubourg.
Yes. And that's really
So
cool that he paid homage to that.
yes, and it goes also back to the other things that we all say, that you'll write what you know. I mean,
Yeah.
what better thing to include some of the things that he experienced? Now, he probably took some writing liberties, and we all know that he can on
Mhm.
certain things to embellish. So it wouldn't probably be exactly the same thing, but it is good that he does include that kinds of things, especially from that
Yeah.
early of an age.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And he remained there until the summer of 1817. I'm sure, like, that was the end of the school year
Mhm.
when, they took him out of that one. And then he enrolled in the fall of 1817. He was admitted to the Manor House School of the Reverend Mr. John Bransby at Stoke
Mhm.
Newington.
Exactly. And that's one of those experiences that has been said that Poe's experience inspired his short story of William Wilson.
Exactly. Yes. And it's really cool to go back and read William Wilson after, like, looking up all of these facts about the Manor House School, because
Mhm.
when he's describing things and mentioning, John Bransby and things of that nature in the story, it's pretty cool when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. And it's pretty interesting that he would include so much, and especially include so much of the story that has an experience of his own life, that
Mhm.
sometimes you're thinking as you're reading, well, I wonder how much of this might be, his own imagination, but at the same time, what are some things that are actually real
Right,
in the story?
exactly. Yeah, because Jeannie, I wanted to read a little part of William Wilson that kind of has a description of what he shows as it's a little bit of a long paragraph, but you kind of wonder how much of this was real. And there is a picture that you can see. I tried to use it as my background, but it you could see through my mouth because of the white background behind me. It was really, Jeannie and I had a good time
Yeah.
looking at that. But I'm going to read
Yeah.
that really quickly, okay?
Okay.
So, from William Wilson, this is straight out of what Poe described the Manor House School as. However, looking at the picture, I think he may have embellished a little bit. So here we go.
Hmm.
My earliest recollections of a school life are connected with a large, rambling, cottage built and somewhat decayed building in a misty looking village of England, where were a vast number of gigantic and gnarled trees, and where all the houses were excessively ancient and inordinately tall. In truth, it was a dreamlike and spirit soothing place, that venerable old town. At this moment, in fancy, I feel the refreshing chilliness of its deeply shadowed avenues, inhale the fragrance of its thousand shrubberies, and thrill anew with undefinable delight at the deep hollow note of the church bell, breaking each hour with sullen and sudden roar, upon the stillness of the dusky atmosphere in which the old fretted Gothic steeple lay embedded and asleep.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how some of that I can picture based on the picture of the actual school.
Yeah, the cottage, like, style, absolutely, in the street,
Yeah.
and, like, a church bell ringing close by within the town. Absolutely.
Yeah, but the other things I can see where he's embellished,
Yeah,
probably just for the story.
the Gothic steeple.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
absolutely.
Gothic parts of that, definitely.
Yeah, but
But
it
it makes
it
most sense.
yeah.
And I mean, of course, it's Poe. He's got great description there.
Yes, and so in 1817, Poe would have been 8, and
Hmm.
the students were referred to as, like, with their last name. They were referred to as Master Allen instead of, like, Mr. or just Edgar, Eddie, as his close family members knew him as when he was younger
Hmm.
and even older. And he studied a variation of classical things like French, Latin, history, and literature. And basically, John Allen paid for this school and made sure that he had what he needed. Now, that does change later, but we won't talk about that yet.
Yeah, I mean, the early parts of the boarding houses are deemed kind of like what any kind of school here in the United States. They would kind of be the equivalent of parochial schools.
Yeah.
And some ideas that instead of, you know, living in there, but we do have those types of academies here. We have some military academies, we have some of the
Mhm.
boys' academies, girls' academies, those kinds of things where the parents literally their children are sent and they live there for the whole year. They're not bussed
Right.
back and forth. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like what Poe had to deal with, and which in one way it's cruel in my opinion because Frances, right? Her name was Frances.
Yes, his foster
Okay.
mother. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I was making sure. I always get them mixed up sometimes. So, I mean, Frances being in another country and no children of her own, Edgar was the only child that
Mhm.
she wanted and had. So, but sent him off to boarding school. So
Right.
she really was by herself
Yeah.
in another country because you know as well as I do that John was off doing his business stuff, trying to get his business off the ground or whatever. He wasn't paying any attention to her, and
Oh,
he
no.
shipped Edgar off to boarding school, so he's always good. So,
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
and especially with Edgar being an American in a British school.
Mhm.
So you know that he's probably had to deal with some type of bullying, being made fun of, which if you have read William Wilson, then you can feel some of that in the story.
Absolutely. Because it kind of just in some of the other things that we found about his post stay at especially the manor school, because he was there the longest of all of these
Hmm.
schools in England, is that he was odd but a good student and things like that. And I think that the oddness came out later on, especially when he's at the University of Virginia, and we'll talk about that here soon. But he was referred to, this is a quote, was a quick and clever boy, would have been a very good boy if he had not been spoilt by his parents, meaning the Allens.
Hmm.
So that's very interesting too. And if they did spoil him, especially while they were in England, that could have factored into how Poe kind of assumed that he was going to be taken care of by John Allen, while at least he was going to finish school.
Yeah, and I mean you can make the assumption that he was spoiled based on there being no other children in the picture,
Right.
that John was just trying to make Frances happy by allowing her to have Edgar
Mhm.
and everything. And so, in order to make Francis happy, he had to make Edgar happy. So,
Mhm.
spoiled children all the way around. So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, one thing we also found, which we thought was really interesting, was a bill from the Manor House School at Stoke Newington, and this was around December, around Christmas time of 1818, that was sent to John Allen, and it says John Allen Esquire for Master Allen to the Reverend John Bransby. And it lists and itemizes all of the things that John Allen had to pay for Edgar to go to school. And so it's really fascinating. So, of course, board and education, and
mhm.
for people that board is just rent basically, and
Yeah,
then
living.
yeah, and then washing in a single bed, and it was like a dollar pound, and I forget all of the different denominations of the money in England. I know
Filling.
there's, yeah, shilling and such. A single bed was like a little over £2. And then there was an allowance of half a pound, and it
Hmm.
says pew and cherry sermon. So basically, it almost sounds like that he's paying for a little bit of the use of the church when they go to, like, you know, services and things like that associated with the school.
Yeah, and they do have a vacation,
Yes,
which means they can go home and all that kind of stuff.
right.
And so apothecary, which I think is very cool. The
Yeah,
sundries, we all know what that means. The apothecary is if they need anything for a headache or anything
right.
like that.
Medicinal. Yeah.
And shoemaker and hairdresser.
I thought that was really, and a tailor as well, even though they spell
Hmm.
tailor a little bit different than we do.
Yeah, just a little bit. Dancing and drawing and music. So they did have their
Yes.
electives.
Mm-hmm.
French, French, of course, being the the choice of foreign language.
Exactly.
And so
Books and
it's very,
stationery.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just very interesting that it's pound, shilling, and what's the D? I can't remember what the D stands for. But English pounds to American dollars, because they also had to think that, yes, they had to convert the money.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, this is the early 1800s, and we didn't have what we have now. Back then,
Right.
it was different.
Yeah.
Very few of dollars. It was a lot of uh, coinage.
Exactly. And I think this bill is also very telling that, they took care of not only just the manner of how the children, stayed at the boarding house with, clean conditions, but also their appearance and a well-rounded education, because you've got the classical studies, you've got
Mm-hmm.
the, like, Jeannie, as you just said, electives, as we know it today. It
Mm-hmm.
probably, I'm sure it would be called a little bit different term back then. And just the health, well-being, and fun. It's not just kind of like, I guess it would be field trips today.
Yeah. Yeah, and because they would expect them to be world rounded. It wouldn't just be uh you do just the four major classes. Remember, they had to have their language, because it was business, it was
Hmm.
um all the different types of things that they had to learn, because that was the gentlemanly way.
Right.
Just like females with their finishing schools.
Hmm. And
So,
one other thing I was going to add too, that, in doing some research, is that, at the school, most likely there were people that were, doing archery and things like that, and they would shoot at popinjays, the bird.
mhm.
And Poe actually referred to popinjays in his poem Romance and the Bargain Lost. And I believe, I want to double check. I think the Bargain Lost is a short story, but don't, it may be a poem. I'm looking it up.
Oh, and FYI, Popinjay came to be like in today's society with the connotations of words. In dime store novels, they wrote Popinjays were meanings of males who had a different persuasion.
Ah, interesting.
Yep. They
Okay.
dressed femininely and had, they didn't come out and call them that, but that was basically what they would refer to them as, the feminine. Good Lord, I can't say that word. The
Femininity?
femininity. Thank you. So I got stuck because, like, what?
Oh,
But yeah, and then that's just a little tidbit to go with how things change with,
yeah.
especially schools and stuff like that, and how they would shoot at the popinjays. Those meanies, they're just poor little birds.
I know. Well, and I was correct. The Bargain Lost is one of his short stories, which also bears the name of Bon Bon, which is a comedy a short story that Poe wrote and published in 1832. So that wasn't too far from, his growing up, going to school. So it was fresh in his memory, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure, from his old school days.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And then the thing that I really do feel bad about Edgar is that he wasn't able to continue his boarding school time
Hmm.
because they were up and gone from England by 1820.
Yeah. And why, Jeanie, was that?
It's because good old John Allen could not make his business come to fruition. So he took his family and sailed back across the Atlantic on the ship Martha to go
Hmm.
back to Richmond, Virginia, because
Okay.
he just couldn't make it happen. I mean, he wanted to start that business, but he never could bring it to fruition.
That's and
So,
that's a shame that that happened, especially with him having so much family where they were living.
yeah, and I mean, he brought him over there, and Poe was being successful, for lack of better word,
Hmm. Yeah.
word, at the boarding house, and we don't even know what's going on with Frances at this time. She should have, she could have made friends on her own or whatever, and had a
Right.
nice little. But all of a sudden, getting all this upheaval, 5 years,
Yeah.
and they're back in Virginia, and then Poe has to start all over again his education, but this
Hmm.
time he's at a different school that's under a tutelage. It's more of a single person type of tutor.
Right.
Because
Right.
in
And
the United
this.
States, it wasn't really public schools like we have today.
Hmm. And he started there in 1821.
20.
Okay. And then it was the Private Academy of Joseph H. Clark.
Yep. Yeah, and he had later recounted, Joseph H. Clark actually later recounted about Poe that while the other boys wrote mere mechanical verses, Poe wrote genuine poetry. The boy was born poet. So,
Nice. And we
and
know
he,
that is the truth.
yeah. Oh, and also they actually make comment about how he had athletic prowess in swimming, boxing, and running.
Oh yes, absolutely. So I mean, he was again with all of his school prep and in England as well as the United States. He was a well-rounded individual and pretty much could do almost anything he wanted if he put his mind to it.
Yeah. Yeah, but unfortunately, he was only at Joseph H. Clark for 2 years. Then he ended up going to another seminary for
Hmm.
boys at William Burke's Seminary for Boys in 1823.
Yeah.
And that's where he met his friend Robert Craig Stannard,
Hmm.
who he fell in love with her mother,
Had a
fell in love with
huge
his
crush.
mother,
Yes.
Jane, and that
Yes.
would become his first childhood crush.
Exactly, which the first poem to Helen
Mhm.
was written about.
Exactly. And, unfortunately, she died in 1824.
Hmm.
And he took it. I mean, think about it. Poor Poe, it's like the women in his life have always left him, you
Yeah.
know, and so now he lost his first crush,
Hmm.
and it just, with that poem and everything. And so it leads him into he finishes out and
And
ends
I
up at the
wanted to,
age 17. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was going to say, I wanted to add, like, once he did come back and attended both of the schools, returning from England in the United States in Richmond, he basically developed a very larger interest in science based on some of the classes he was taking. He was still taking all of the classical studies like French, Latin, arithmetic and
Hmm.
English and things like that. But this is where science really kind of came in and played a larger role than it had in the past. And I think it's because this is where Poe started his secondary education, kind of growing out of that grammar school model.
Yeah, and not only that, but when he came back to America during this time period, this
Hmm.
is also during the time of the Second Great Awakening,
Right,
where
right.
science and religion start merging together based off of,
Hmm.
Sir Isaac Newton's, age of gravity and all that. So science was starting to make its way into everything, especially in education,
Yeah.
and trying to work with religion. So I think that had had a big play on Edgar too.
Oh, absolutely. And he was studying things, especially even more so. We're about to talk about the University of Virginia because
Mhm.
these two secondary schools really prepared him for the university world. And he was doing studying all types of math, doing learning navigation skills and optics and astronomy and things like that, which really, I think, led him into writing Eureka, based on just he kept up with all of the latest scientific theories in the world throughout his entire life.
Well, and we both know that the only nonfiction writing that Poe ever did was on seashells.
Correct. Well,
So,
besides Eureka, yes.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
but
The
I'm
the,
just
the
saying,
textbook, yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
seashell.
I actually have that book on seashells. I have not read it yet, but I plan to whenever I make the time because I'm reading all kinds of books right now.
And it makes sense that, because that's very scientific if you're
Yeah,
talking about seashells.
absolutely.
So, and it would go with Poe
Hmm.
and his world, and we know based on things that we've read that he was a very smart man.
Yes. A genius level, really, when you think about
Hmm.
it, and what the way people have described him.
I mean, he entered the University of Virginia at the age of 17.
Yes, because I think, wasn't it around 1826 when he
Yeah.
entered? Yeah.
Yeah, 1826 he started classes at University of Virginia.
Actually,
And
on
then,
your birthday, he entered.
yeah. Hey, that's perfect. It's a Valentine. Woo-hoo.
Yes, and his mother, or I'm sorry, his foster mother, Frances, was Frances Valentine, which we mentioned before, who also was
Who
born
was
on
born on
Valentine's
Valentine's
Day.
Day. Yes, the irony of it all.
I know, I know. It's so funny.
Yeah, it's amazing when those things come into play. But
Yeah.
and I hate to say it, to me, this is where Pose starts his spiral. He,
Yes.
yeah, at the University of Virginia, he's excelling. He's doing great at his
Hmm.
studies. Everything seems to be working, but unfortunately, he's got the gambling bug.
Yes, but let's also talk a little bit too about like what he did there before the gambling bug took effect, and we'll tell why. And I think a lot of people know
Mhm.
this too. But he was the 136 of 177 students that registered for the second session of the University of Virginia. So he was really among one of the first groups of students who enrolled and attended the University of Virginia. And some of the
Mhm.
things that I found and read was that he actually like could see part of the university still being built while he was there because it wasn't totally finished, which is
Oh,
really just, it's just surreal to think about that.
well, yeah, and it's also surreal to think that there were actually universities in this time period. There's actually
Hmm.
most people don't understand that there's been universities way back, since the 1600s in the United
Right.
States.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, in Virginia, unfortunately, because it wasn't really up there with the New England areas, because New
Hmm.
England was more of where the money was and everything. So they had their ability and had their culture that they could start these universities and colleges so early.
Right. Right. And
And
one of the huge benefactors and contributors to this university was Thomas Jefferson.
absolutely,
Hmm.
because I mean, he was the father of the Declaration of Independence.
Right. Exactly.
Hmm.
And so leading back to Poe, so some of the things he studied there were ancient and modern languages, and even listing some of his professors, Professors Long and Blatterman, also like that, which I think is really neat to, hear about some of his teachers or professors that were there. And they pretty much said that he wasn't really known for, studying for hours and hours at a time, cooped up in his room doing that. He was more of a lonely genius, which that's exactly what I picture in my head of Poe as a student. And he was just so highly intelligent, he could recall things, and he heard it once, he knew it.
Yeah, because I mean, he had probably, I'm just going on a limb here because I don't know for sure, but it
Oh yeah,
sounds
just
like he had a
supposing.
photo.
Yeah.
Yeah, he sounds like he had like a photographic type memory
Yeah,
because his memory was so good about him being able to recite correctly.
yeah, and I think, is it
And
didactic? Is that the term?
eidetic, an
Yes,
eidetic,
yes,
an
yes.
eidetic memory is kind of like what Sheldon in The Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
Photographic memory is not as okay. Eidetic memory is really rare.
Yes.
Photographic memory is rare also, but it's not as prominent,
Mm-hmm.
and you can still remember things and recall things a lot better, but it's not as an exact, I guess is what
Right.
I'm trying to say.
Right. And
So it could be
so
either one.
yeah, and Poe wasn't just a good student. He also, I mean, he was more than just that. He was involved in extracurricular activities. He was elected to the Jefferson Literary and Debating Society on June 17th, 1826, and
Mm-hmm.
served as secretary for a short time. And he also did debates and things like that, and he was writing during that time frame, and he would hold readings in his room where his peers and friends were just mesmerized by his stories and essays that he wrote.
Yeah. And like any temperamental writer, he had his ups and his downs,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it come to getting any kind of criticism.
Yeah.
And so it's even said here that at one time he was reading a short story that he had written especially for his friends,
Mm-hmm.
and the hero's name was Gaffy, but they
Yes.
started telling him that Gaffy was repeated too often in the story. And then Poe was, I guess in a huff,
Yeah,
hurled the manuscript into the fire, thereby earning the longtime nickname of Gaffy Poe.
that is hilarious.
Yes. And it actually says the nickname, though never relished, is said to have followed him all the way to West Point 5 years later.
That is really fascinating. and I don't think he ever used Gaffy as a name of a character in a
Mhm.
story. That would have been amazing if he had done that, but I'm sure he wasn't crazy about that nickname.
No, especially since he got such ridicule from
Yeah,
his friends for it. So,
absolutely. Yeah. But yeah,
and
but yeah, he had friends. They thought his writing was very amazing,
mhm.
and his professors thought he was very talented. But
Yeah.
then John Allen was not quite giving him enough money for his needs, even just his basic needs, to stay at the University of Virginia.
Mhm. And so he was forced to borrow credit from Charlottesville merchants and then turn to heavy
Mhm.
gambling in an attempt to pay off the bills.
Exactly. Yeah.
But
And it's a shame that he didn't get to finish out his degree. But when you think about all of the things that happened in his early life, what if his real parents had not died so young? His father
mhm.
hadn't left him. What would have happened? Where would he have been? If John Allen had made his business work, would Poe have been a European writer with a British or Scottish accent?
Yeah, I mean,
You
it
know?
would make sense because if he stayed there long enough since he was so young when they moved over there, he would have probably picked up the language and
Yeah.
the accent and everything else. And who knows if he'd ever actually came back to the United States.
Yeah, exactly. It's just I like to play the what if game, just thinking about how different would Poe be, and we probably would not have had the works that he gave us had he not gone through the things he did.
Yeah, we would not had the Poe that we had.
The Poe we know.
Yeah. If we had not gotten the exact timeline the way he lived it, we would not have known the Poe that we do.
Yeah,
Yeah, we wouldn't
absolutely.
know the Poe we know.
And this is another interesting thing. There is a legend that this pane of glass that was taken from the window of room 13, and that was his room, was room 13, which is
Mhm.
very, very interesting that that was the number of his room in the West Range, that the actual pane of glass is now on display in the rotunda at the University of Virginia, that he etched the following stanza in the pane on his last night there. And this is what it's supposedly he who wrote it. O thou timid one, let not thy form rest in slumber within these unhallowed walls, for herein lies the ghost of an awful crime.
Yep.
That just sounds kind of like I'm sticking it to you, University of Virginia or
Yeah.
John Allen.
Yeah, I think it'd be more John Allen
Yeah,
because the crime is that he has to leave school, and the unhallowed walls is where he has to leave because it's no longer sacred ground.
right. Exactly. And what's really, really cool, and this is one Poe place that I have yet to visit, and I'm excited to go whenever I can, is they actually have his room preserved as best as they can. I don't know if there's replica furniture. I don't know like all the ins and outs of what they have in the room, but you can go to the University of Virginia and actually see his room, which I think is
Yep.
really cool.
Well, it makes sense. He was one of the most popular uh people that attended it. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Jeanie, road trip.
whoop whoop.
Yeah.
I'm there. University of Virginia. I don't know.
Yes.
Would they let us in?
Oh, they would. We just need to behave.
Well, that's like I said. Would they let us in? Okay.
Oh,
But it would be definitely a good trip to go to see just another piece of history. Okay, I'm
absolutely.
starting to rhyme.
Yeah, and and again, he didn't get to stay at the university for very long, but it had to have some impact on his life. He really was, starting to really write while he was there.
Mhm,
He wrote Tamerlane, and I believe he also wrote A Tale of the Ragged Mountains. And
mhm,
so it just, he really just, it solidified who he was. I don't know that I want to say solidified, but it really ignited is the better word I'm looking for,
mhm.
who he was to be a writer, to fulfill that dream.
Yeah, and it just gives you the idea that once again that Poe was a scholar. He was a man who wanted to learn and he wanted to experience what life had to offer and he wanted to share that with everybody else by his writing.
Mhm.
So if I think if we're going to do the what if game, I think if he had been able to continue at the University of Virginia, he would have
Yeah.
continued writing, but I think the writing would have turned out differently
Yes,
than
I
what
agree
we
with
have
you.
today.
I totally agree
So,
with you.
and
Absolutely.
it may not have been able to spurn him into some of the writings that he has given that has become the most popular
Mhm.
if he did
Especially
not
the
experience.
right,
Yeah,
especially the horror stories that we have.
exactly.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
even though he had to experience that tragedy, I
Mhm.
guarantee he saw that as a tragedy that he had to leave. And
I would.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would
Mhm.
definitely. Uh,
Mhm.
but
'Cause you're
it,
gonna
it
feel like a failure to some degree. I think some
yeah,
people would. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, just like Abraham Lincoln said over and over again, if you fail, try again.
Yeah.
And that's the equivalent of Edgar Allan Poe. Abraham Lincoln, he failed numerous times to become a lawyer, and he finally, and he succeeded. He just had to
Mhm.
keep trying, and just like with Poe, everything that he failed at, it caused him to try something different and
Yeah.
kept going.
Absolutely. And it just became
Yeah.
better and better. His writing, grew and grew and grew.
Yep.
And it just, the impact to me, school has such an impact on every person, regardless of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It,
Mm-hmm.
it it shapes a lot of who you are, because I think all of us kind of look back on memories of childhood, and you don't necessarily always look at just like family situations or friends that you're playing with and doing different things. You look back at things that happened in school. And I think I'm
Yeah.
saying this a lot because this is my 35th year out of high school this year. And so it's kind of hitting with me because some of my former peers from my graduating class are saying, "Let's have a reunion."
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah,
Yeah.
I think back about those things, and I'm sure that just like all of us, though, all of what Poe learned and how he learned and the people that taught him, it left something in him that he carried with him for his short life.
Yeah. And it goes to show that the earliest parts of your life have an impact
Hmm.
because he wrote William Wilson, even though it may not been a true rendition of his life
Yeah,
in boarding school, it was definitely impactful enough for him to write a story about it.
absolutely.
And, I think back to my early years, and the earliest that I have is impactful because of a teacher.
Right.
The teacher, not the other students, not this subject area. And I only had her as a teacher for one semester because she died after Christmas,
Oh,
my first
wow.
grade year.
Mhm.
So but I remember I remember her, the way she looked.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I can remember, and just the impact of her teaching and how nice she was, but also how strict she was. But
Yeah,
as and that's as far as it goes, but that's very impactful to someone, especially of an early age. They make those impressions. And
they
so even
do.
though Poe had to go through that at a boarding school in another country after
Mm-hmm.
going through so much upheaval of losing his mother and no, his sister and his brother, and having a different set of parents, he was having to adjust, in which that's the one good thing. Most children are very adjustable, especially at that young of an age.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in a way, it's good because in those boarding schools, it seemed to have helped develop his love of learning and
Yeah.
love of languages and those kind of things. So when he was brought back to the United States, that was still pushed forward. He wasn't just left hanging, so to speak.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree totally. And Jeannie, I had wonderful teachers in school, especially I don't want to say just in elementary school, but like those teachers really stick out, and some of my teachers in high school do as well. But I had my teacher in fourth grade who taught literature, or I should say English, and she was also my sixth grade English teacher. But in the fourth grade, she allowed me to take a short story that I had written and present it to the class, create a contest where all the students in my class finished their own version of the ending of the story, let me grade them and judge and pick the winner. And that is, I mean, that's fourth grade, 1980. And I still remember that. I still have that story, and I still have the person that won's ending. And so it school is impactful, and I think, yeah, of course, I'm going to be very emotional about it right now, and I know Jeannie, just from conversations we've had about going back to school and you
Hmm.
retiring, it's an emotional thing for teachers, because making those connections with students are so important to drive our future generation to be as great as Poe.
Yeah. And as well as I do that not all the children that we have over the years turns out in good instances. I
Right.
still remember the first child that I lost as a teacher, and I don't mean, leaving school or anything, but the first student that I had die.
Yeah.
Um, and it, it has impacts both ways, whether
Hmm.
you're the student or whether you're the teacher.
Yeah.
And we all are lifelong learners,
Hmm.
whether we're going back into an institution that's set, whether it be grade school, high school, college, postgraduate, whatever,
Hmm.
trade schools. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter if we're just
No.
learning a trade. Everything has some type of impact.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that Poe and his writing shows, is that every part of his life, from his early days at school up until the ending of his life, had some type of impact on him in some way,
Yes.
whether it be the people, the places, or the things.
Yeah. And he truly, like we've said many times before, he wrote what he knew, and
Mm-hmm.
it came out, even if he did put spins on it to be more fictionalized, to kind of, I
Hmm.
guess, protect the names.
Yeah,
But that's okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it just, like I said, it's, you just have to take everything that goes on in your life and experience it and find a way to either share it, deal with it,
Hmm.
or recreate it like Poe did.
Yeah. I
So,
agree. And one of the things, I'm going to try to move my head so people can see it, is
hmm.
this is a plaque at the where the manor house school was, uh, in London, and it has Poe's name, writer and poet, his birth to death date. Was a pupil at the Manor House School from 1817 till 1820, which stood on this site. And I just think that is so cool. And I can't wait to finally make a journey across the pond because I've never been across the pond to
Mm-hmm.
see this plaque. I just think it's going to be amazing to stand
Yep.
in front of it and get a picture.
Yep. And the manor house was actually taken down in 1880.
Yeah.
It was pulled down. So
Mhm.
it'll be fun to go see those things, to cross the pond to see where Poe had once become.
Yes,
That would be
and
another Poe
walks.
places, and hopefully we'll be able to get there in those Poe places across the pond. Hey,
That's right.
yeah,
Oh,
Poe places across the pond.
yes,
Yay!
but not frog pondians. Da da da
No,
da. Not those.
dun,
Not
dun,
those
dun.
pondians. Yes,
No,
we will
no,
not digress on them.
wrong
Oh,
Pondians. All right, so I think our back to school has really set the stage for our back to the fourth
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 season.
season. Yes,
Yes,
6 Degrees of Poe.
that's right. That's right. So I guess on that
No,
note,
we
we
are
are
Poe.
out.
Not in knowledge is happiness, but in the acquisition of knowledge. In forever knowing, we are forever blessed. But to know all were the curse of a fiend.